Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello?
Hello, could I please speak with Sherry Turkle?
This is she.
Sherry, what a pleasure to have you on the phone. Thank you so much for being part of the Quarantine Tapes.
I'm delighted.
I'm so glad you're here. How are you?
I'm well.
Tell me, how have you been living these last 3 months of the quarantine period in our lives?
Well, at first, I didn't do so well. I was alone in Boston, and I discovered that although I thought of myself as a great solitude expert, having written so much about it, and
that makes you laugh. So.
Well, and also having experienced it and been nurtured by it. And I really, my grandmother would have said I was a solitude maven. But
little did she know.
Little did she know. Well, but I really do. I did think of myself, not only as someone who appreciated it, but who understood its importance and who was nourished by a great deal of solitude. And then I realized that I am great at solitude if I'm not anxious. That was very important to my great love of solitude. I was good at solitude when I wasn't anxious. I also realized that I had a great deal of solitude in my life, but I was supported by being able to be in what sociologists call third spaces, places where, the cafe, my classes, meetings, my activities, giving speeches, being in communities, political events. I was very much in the mix of a rich social and political life, so that when I then retreated into solitude, it was nurturing, and I came to myself. And
what did you discover when you came to yourself?
Well, I discovered my creativity. I was able to write, and that was kind of my normal way of being. In quarantine, all of those other supports went away. And I didn't have my classes and my friends and my dinners and my meetings and my clubs, and everything went to Zoom, which I found did not give me the full, how should I put it, the full embrace of the human. I missed the people. It took me a long time to get into this new medium. And so the beginning of my quarantine was difficult, and I saw my limitations, and I actually went to the seashore where I joined my daughter and her husband so that I wasn't alone anymore. And so I kind of had I confronted my limitations in this moment, and then I calmed down. I calmed down about my fears of getting sick. I calmed down about how I could be an effective teacher on Zoom, and I consecrated myself to really doing that as best as I possibly could. And my resilience came back.
It's interesting because I spoke with Simon Critchley, a philosopher, not so long ago, and he said that this moment of the quarantine is a heightened, in a way, philosophical moment for some.
Yes.
And in a way, this is what has happened to Sherry Turkle. It's an existential reckoning.
Yes. And I really think that it both an existential reckoning and a political reckoning. I think that I've been brought to, watching. It's one thing to, being so upset. I'm both upset about the virus and also feel as though I'm watching what's going on in this country. Have been watching what's going on in this country.
You mean
as a spectator?
You mean on television and on the news?
Yes.
And we all have been, we all have been watching so much, and I'm reminded of the very short curt line of Will Smith, who said, racism is not getting worse, it's getting filmed.
Yes, exactly. And actually, I've been brought back. When we had a brief correspondence in which I said that I'm beginning to feel hope. It's really because I've been brought back to the writing of and the thinking of someone I studied with so many years ago, Victor Turner, an anthropologist.
Tell me about him, because he interested me. I mean, Victor Turner, together with Mary Daly, together with Irving Goffman, a whole group. I mean, I'm sure you recognize elective affinities there. But since you studied with Victor Turner, give our listeners a sense of him, and maybe a sense of him, Sherry, at this moment, because I think your turning to him now is consequential.
Yes, it is. I mean, because it is where I'm finding, what you said, when you said I had a kind of a crisis, he's where I'm turning to anchor myself in seeing hope. He was an anthropologist who studied what he called the liminal, the betwixt and between moments in the life of a society that from the outside look as though everything is falling apart, the rules are falling apart, and sociologists don't like to study them, and that's what he noticed first, because they seemed pathological. And he said, no, they must be studied. These moments when people lose confidence in the rules, when people cast about, these moments of what he called anti-structure must be studied, because people really are vulnerable and open and porous in a way that makes them accessible for something really new to happen. He called it communitas, the feelings of openness and ability to see new things and to form new communities that were possible during this time. And he was a very realistic man. He didn't glamorize this. I mean, he was a very commonplace, he was a great teacher and a very down-to-earth person. He didn't glamorize this, but he spoke in deeply moving terms of what was possible in these moments of communitas, where there really is the possibility of something new. And that's my optimism, when something new can grow up. And I feel that now that's what I'm seeing, that's what I'm feeling, the possibility that things are being delegitimated, where something truly new can grow up.
And what would that be? What would that new? I interrupted you. Forgive me. What would that new? You were about to say. I want you to continue there. But what would that new? What Gershom Scholem spoke about when he spoke about having shards of hope. What is that new? Nearly portal. That opening.
Yes. Well, I feel that my generation of protests, 60s, made dust fly. And we basically left the system intact. And I feel that right now, living the echoes of the pandemic of 1918, the protests of 68, and for me, echoes of the rise of fascism in 1938 all together, offers the chance of something, this genuinely new portal opening, the coming out of the crucible of this current disorder. And that new thing would be really going back in some sense to the promises of what is in our Constitution that we've never, everybody carries it so close to their heart and prints copies of it. And,
and sometimes reads it.
But whether or not they read it, they pay no attention to what's in it or what it says or what it hopes,
right?
But the hope of it is, I mean, people being treated equally, created equally. I mean, all of these things were written down and ignored for the longest period of time. But really to have a democracy where we make some of the terrible inequalities right. I feel that things are being said now and things are being shown now that people have known about and have really willed themselves not to see. It's been taboo to talk about them. You could know about them, but not...
Which things in particular speak to you so strongly? And maybe I could even ask you, which things speak to you most strongly, both as a professor, you're a professor at MIT, and also as someone who lived through moments of unrest. I mean, you didn't live through the unrest of 1938-39, but you carry it as one can.
Yeah.
But you did live through the unrest of the 60s, and you probably recall that moment, and I imagine it was a very heightened moment at MIT.
Yes. I'll tell you, I lived in a home where every night at dinner we discussed the fall of the Weimar Republic and how it couldn't happen again. I mean, that was sort of before coffee.
The daily first meal.
Yes, that was kind of, you know, that was part of the dinner table discussion, and how my grandmother would take me down to the mailboxes, and she would say, you know, that we're in America because in America, the mail, you know, it's safe. It's a federal offense that anyone opens your mail. I mean, she vaguely knew about J. Edgar Hoover, I think, but, you know, in principle for her, you know, that she felt a sense of, despite everything she knew when she hated the McCarthy movement and so forth, she felt that here there was a structure where you would not have the horrors. You would not have the horrors. And I think that as this country, what has impressed me is that in the past few years is how things happen and people see them and speak of them, and then we go to dinner and we go to lunch and the next day start. And so those anxieties from all those dinner table conversations about how could it happen, I feel I'm living in a kind of childhood trauma of actually seeing exactly how it could happen. It happens because you see something going on, but your daughter's getting married, or you need to take care of you need an operation, or your friend is ill, and you take care of that first before you take, you know, people just take care of those things and they don't know sort of how to attack the big thing. So I feel that every night I'm chatting in my mind with my grandparents and reliving these. I was raised by my grandparents and sort of reliving these conversations with them about how it could happen.
Tell me the most recent conversation you've had with them in your head.
I think the most recent conversation really was explaining Donald Trump's Tulsa rally. I was discussing that with my grandmother, and how this is a country where there is no break to the President of the United States endangering citizens, and how that could happen. I think that is something that my grandmother would not. She would not understand how in this country that could happen. And I was saying about my hopefulness. I mean, since this began, this was my lead up to my hopefulness. And my saying what Victor Turner, I think, would find the shards of hope is that I think you're beginning to see, or what I feel among my students and my friends and in the media and in, you know, my sense of the political situation, is that despite the fact that it is going to happen, there is a sense of these rules don't make sense anymore. This should not happen. You know, the rules that are allowing this to happen simply should not, you know, this is so pushing the system to its limit that something fundamental has to change.
When you say these rules, one wonders, are there rules, or is it authoritarianism, unlawfulness, and people just backing that unlawfulness?
Well, I mean, there was a lawful appeal to the lawful Supreme Court to not have the rally, and it was turned down. I mean, as all authoritarians do, there's a slow takeover of the normal apparatus, so that there's the infrastructure that says this is lawful to do it. I mean, that's the trouble with authoritarianism. It takes over the structures that make these things seem lawful. But what I was saying is that I feel as though that the system, to me, as Turner would say, is breaking to the point that people feel that they are in that betwixt and between state.
Right.
People no longer feel, in my view, that they are part of what was before.
So I want to talk about your grandmother taking you to the mailbox. It's so interesting. First of all, I have a passion for letters. I have a passion for the post office. So I'm particularly disturbed by what's happening to the post office. I think it's a miraculous institution. I think it's extraordinary that for 500 years or more we've been putting paper on paper and it somehow gets somewhere else. We put a stamp on an envelope and magically, I mean, it seems magical to me, it appears a few days or sometimes a few weeks or sometimes never in your mailbox. It's extraordinary. But you've said, and I think that's so interesting, that without privacy, which your grandmother believed in, you may not, Sherry, open this letter. It isn't addressed to you. But without privacy, you've said, there can be no democracy. So I'm curious about that articulation, particularly since now we're living in an age which you've studied for the last half century nearly, the age of being able to open everything and seeing all messages.
Right. Well, it's interesting. When I first asked myself, so the thing about my grandmother in the mailbox, I mean, she would bring me to the mailbox.
I love it.
And she would take me, and she would, as though she had never said it before, and she would say, it is a federal offense in this country to open anyone else's mail. And she, she said, this is why we're here. And at first I thought I didn't know what it was, but it was almost like a prayer. It was a litany. It really was a prayer for me and my future. And I became not just an American citizen. I became a civil libertarian. I became a profound believer in a certain kind of democracy and hopefulness. And when I began to study what the impact of electronic communication was on democracy, I thought of the question of privacy and democracy and privacy and intimacy as two separate questions. And I thought to myself, without privacy, there can be no democracy, and without privacy, there can be no intimacy. And I said both of those things when I began to study and began to see how people were talking and how people experienced this loss of privacy. And now I feel those two questions are linked. They're the same question. We have to think of them together. Privacy, intimacy, and democracy are not separate things. When we lose the capacity for privacy, we're losing democracy and intimacy together and at the same time. That's why the fact that Facebook, shaves off our data and shaves off our lives and starts to feed us only certain kinds of information, that's taking away both our democracy and our privacy at the same time, and our capacity to have a kind of self that has boundaries, that can be in a certain kind of intimate relationship with other people because we have boundaries.
And with itself.
Yes, and with
itself, which is extremely important, which goes back to the surprise you had at the difficulty of being alone, because there's an articulation that you, I think about quite deeply, which is a difference between solitude and loneliness.
Yes, Yes. Loneliness is a sadness and an emptiness, and solitude is not. And what I was experiencing and that distressed me is that I could not bring myself to the comforts that I have always been able to experience of my capacity for solitude. That is what was troubling me. Of course I was lonely. Naturally I was lonely. I'm supposed to be lonely. Everybody was lonely.
there is a line, Sherry. I'm wondering whether you know it, by the extraordinary English psychoanalyst Winnicott, who said in an essay beautifully entitled "The Contribution of Mothers to Society," he says that the goal for the child is to be alone in the presence of the mother.
Yes.
Which to my mind is the single best definition of what reading is all about.
Yes. And you know what he also said that was so wonderful? He said, if you don't teach your children to be alone, they'll only know how to be lonely.
It's and that immediately, of course, leads me to ask you a question I must ask you, which is, you know the question already. I mean, we're living through this intense moment where we're seeing perhaps a revolution, but we're constantly online. I recently have seen people talk about Zoom as cogito ergo Zoom. Everybody, we're constantly online. What do you think the deep effects à long terme, in the long run, will be the consequences, one might say, of this hyperactivation of our brains with the screen?
Well, I think two things are going to happen. Let me reinterpret that question as to what's going to happen when we have the choice again.
Right. Exactly.
To leave this state of quarantine. Because I think that right now is not the moment, right now is a moment when...
To be careful.
It is better to be on Zoom than not.
Right.
But I think the question is when we can once again be together, we will either say, yes, we have missed each other, and we will take this opportunity to embrace what we have missed. And it will be really a turning point in how much we have overshot how much we have become too reliant on technology in every aspect of our lives. We didn't need to text, not talk. We didn't need to hide behind our screens so as not to be vulnerable to each other. We can come back to each other and use technology more appropriately, now having kind of overdosed on zooming ourselves into oblivion. And this is what I fear that educational institutions and corporations will say, whoa, this was inexpensive. This kind of was friction-free. This made a lot of things,
seemingly easy.
Yes, seemingly easy. This metaphor of friction-free has really come to fascinate me recently. To make human relations friction-free the way you can make engineering and banking friction-free online. Human relationships should be filled with friction. There should not be the aspiration to make them friction-free.
And disagreement.
Yes.
Disagreement. I mean, those dinner table conversations you had, I imagine there was argument.
So much. And my aunt didn't get along with my grandfather, and they were always fighting. And I mean, it was great. It was great. It was the way people were meant to
interact.
There was love. Yes, there was love. There was not. There was
friction.
Love
there
and
was friction.
Yes, there was friction.
I'm always surprised when people say, you should be well-rounded. I say, no, don't be well-rounded. I want edges. I want edges. I want,
Yes.
I want precise.
Yes.
You don't have to agree with me. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure I agree with me either.
Right. Or do I agree with what I thought? I've changed my mind about things that I believed in the beginning of my career.
So that's very interesting, because you had when you wrote your first book, The Second Self. I think it was the first
Yes.
book. It published.
Yes.
I think published in a most extraordinary date in 1984. I imagine.
Yes.
I imagine you had a different view of what the internet, as it were, could promise to give.
Yes. I thought of the computer. Well, I had such a different view of what I called computers the second self, because what I was studying was the way in which people projected their self into this new kind of object, which was betwixt and between, on the border between mind and not mind, evocative enough for some to think it was almost like a mind, and how people saw themselves differently and reflected on what it was to be human. I thought it was a kind of, it brought philosophy down to earth. I was very excited about it as what I called an evocative object. It was the beginning of my thinking about evocative objects. So I was very excited about thinking of the computer as an evocative object, when other people were just saying, Sherry, why are you doing that? It's just a tool. It's just a tool. You're wasting your time. So I was very, didn't mean I was pro-technology. It meant that I wanted to study this as a deeply humanistic object that had so much to give to humanists, because it was bringing philosophy into everyday life, and it still does.
It does. And now the stakes are different. And in closing, sadly, might I say, Montaigne beautifully said that the most fruitful and natural exercise for our minds is, in my opinion, Montaigne said, conversation. And you've been studying conversation for so long, and I'm wondering how you view it now. You were saying that you're hopeful. Do you think that there'll be a space? Would Victor Turner say there would be an opening here for a return to the face-in-face encounter with the other?
Yes, that's the hope that I see. That he felt that in these moments, these liminal moments, these moments when things are up for grabs, you get this experience of what he called communitas, where people want to be face-to-face and talking in a new way. And that is what I am. It happens very rarely. With him, I studied May 68. Was the moment that he and I looked.
Wow.
That's the moment that he and I looked at together and tried to see, what I had been in Paris right after May 68, and I wrote a book about that. And so the question is whether or not those kinds of conversations, the kinds of conversations where people can really see this society anew, are happening now. And I'm hoping so.
I'm hoping
that
so
is what
too.
is giving me hope.
I'm hoping so too. I had occasion to speak recently with David Reef, and he was talking about, the time when he worked with Ivan Illich. I mean, there are these figures, and Victor Turner would be one of them, that maybe point to the possibility of a more a fuller human being. I hope, Sherry, that you will write about these experiences because they are tremendous.
Yes. Yes. Well, I've just finished a memoir. I write about some of them. So
really?
I do write. Yes, I do write about Victor Turner in my memoir.
The memoir? What is it called?
Yeah. The memoir is called The Empathy Diaries, and it was definitely a journey to write about that.
I can't wait to read it. I had so many more questions, including the very, very thorny question of empathy today, but we'll leave it for another time. Sherry, thank you so much for taking my call, and stay safe.
My pleasure.
Stay safe, and let's see each other sometime soon, and let's be sure to argue.
Okay. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.